stories about Christmas, urban exploring, cursed objects, and more. This video hosts 5 stories that will be sure to have you looking over your shoulder. Thank you to all of tonight's writers. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. Stories can either be submitted at my subreddit r/slumberreads or my email you can find in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. It really does help out the channel. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Stay safe out there. Enjoy the video. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. Please, make sure you lock everybody in their rooms on the night before Christmas. It is very important for everybody's health. The name Santa Claus came from St. Nicholas. In Dutch, that would be Sint Nicolaas. And that's where Santa Claus got his name. I can personally attest to the fact that this is false. My father was paranoid. Very paranoid. He was also a little crazy. Maybe more than just a little. We lived in a neighborhood surrounded by trees in the mountains. Growing up, our house had cameras facing every single angle of our property. Not just regular cameras either. Night vision and infrared. The night vision just made everything look gray, but the infrared was blue, and any heat signatures gave off an orange glow. I know this because he had given me access to the cameras, and I frequently viewed them from my computer. Over the years, I have seen some weird things on these cameras. But that's a story for another time. The weirdest thing growing up was Christmas. The holiday itself wasn't weird. We got a Christmas tree, had presents, all the normal things. The weird part was the night before. My dad loves his cameras. We had them on 24/7, 364 days per year. You must be confused. There's 365 days in a year. You're correct. Every year on the night before Christmas, my dad would turn off every single camera. Weird thing is, this wasn't just my dad. The other houses in the neighborhood didn't have cameras or anything fancy. But some of my friends told me they weren't allowed to leave their room either on that night. Anyway, on the night before Christmas, after we laid out the cookies and milk, my dad would make me go to bed early. There was a lock on the outside of my door. My dad was never abusive towards me, but on the night before Christmas he would always lock me in my room. Despite being paranoid and crazy, my dad was the nicest man I've ever known. The only time he ever scared me was how serious he got on the night before Christmas. Delon, do not leave this room. You understand me? I let you run around the neighborhood with your little friends doing whatever the hell y'all damn well please every single day. I let you stay on the computer for hours searching up God knows what. The one thing I ask of you is do not leave your room on this night. My dad had shown me hundreds of missing persons reports. Every time I questioned this little tradition of his, he would have 20 ready to show. All of these missing people had been missing on a December 26th, day after Christmas, spanning back years. Each of these reports had a circumstance of disappearance section that explained what the person had done shortly before their disappearance, and none of it seemed to have anything to do with Christmas. Each one was completely random, but he said that they purposely changed it so that nobody ever finds out what really happened. He would never tell me what really happened. Just another one of his conspiracy theories. Yeah, Dad, I know. You tell me the same thing every year. I know. 14-year-old me replied with attitude. Alright then, I don't want you to be another statistic. You mean statistic? I smirked. Yes, boy. I don't want you to become another statistic. You saw all those missing persons reports I showed you. All those people gone missing on December 26th, day after Christmas, every year. That ain't gonna be my boy. He said as he walked out of my room. He was so paranoid. Did he think Santa was going to kidnap me? Santa isn't even real. After he walked out of my room, I heard a click as he set the lock outside my door. I heard his footsteps protrude away as I turned over to my computer that displayed our camera footage. I counted down. 3, 2, 1, 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, 0.2, 0.1, and boom. Just like that, the camera footage shut off and displayed no feed connected. I felt like a psychic for being able to accurately predict the exact time it would shut off. Good night, boy. my dad shouted across the hall from his room. "Good night," I shouted back. I hated this tradition. I love going downstairs to eat junk food in the middle of the night, and I love checking the camera to get a glance at the weird things I saw in the woods from time to time. But on this night every year, I couldn't go downstairs to eat junk food, and I couldn't bring it upstairs either. No food was allowed in my room. And all that just because of my dad's paranoia. Every year until this day, I just listened to my dad. After he shut off the camera footage and locked me in my room, I would usually just accept it and go to sleep. For some reason, I just couldn't sleep. So despite my dad's wishes, I stayed up playing computer games. Around 2 a.m., I heard something on our roof. There were a lot of animals and other things in those woods, so this was a pretty common occurrence. But the sound I heard this time just sounded different. It sounded like something landed. Uh-oh, Killer Santa must be here, I joked to myself as I continued playing my computer game. Shortly after the thud on the rooftop, I started hearing heavy footsteps followed by our floorboards creaking downstairs. Goosebumps formed on my body, and my breathing got a bit more frantic as I worked up a sweat. What the hell is that? I thought to myself. Then, I got a thought that would prove to be the worst decision I've ever made in my life. I got onto the application that controls the cameras. I looked over the button that would reactivate the cameras and hovered my cursor over it. What if it's an intruder? I tried convincing myself. I took a deep breath that was followed by a loud gulp. Then I clicked activate. The night vision camera switched on. There were almost 50 boxes on my screen, each one blinking on separately. After a few seconds, they were all on. I had my eyes peeled looking at each box, seeing nothing out of the ordinary. That's until I saw the living room camera. Standing in front of our dining room table, next to the Christmas tree, was a big, overweight man in a Santa suit. He had a long beard and glasses. It was the textbook definition of what Santa looked like. My eyes were wide and filled with astonishment as an equal mix of excitement and fear filled my brain. It was exciting, but it's just weird. And it's even more weird that I can't go downstairs. What would Santa do to me if I did? As I was staring at the screen, staring at Santa eating cookies, I noticed that his hand froze in front of his mouth. I saw him slowly lower the cookie back onto the plate. He turned around and looked directly into the camera. He slowly brought his hand up in front of him and wagged his finger side to side. He knew I was watching him. When he did this, I slammed my hands onto the desk to boost me up so I can dive into my bed and pretend to be asleep. I accidentally made contact with the keyboard, causing the camera to switch from night vision to infrared. What I saw on the camera wasn't Santa anymore. It was a big, fat creature with no clothes on. Its mouth was wide open, and it looked like it had a broken and detached jaw. It had large oval eyes that had nothing in them. It had rows of large, razor-sharp teeth in its mouth. The creature was tall, and its arms were long and deformed. At the edge of its arms were hands with sharp claws that replaced its fingers. "Dad?" I screamed. Instantly after, I heard footsteps shuffling to my room. "What did you do, boy? Why are you still awake?" He yelled as he unlocked the door and ran into my room. He looked at my computer and saw the camera footage on. I was on my bed crying. Suddenly I could hear a heavy thud on our staircase. "Oh, you stupid son of a bitch. You stupid, stupid little boy. What have you done?" He said as my crying became hysteric. He sat down next to me, hugged me so tightly as if it's the last time I'll ever feel his hug, and he whispered, "I love you, boy. Don't be scared. Ain't nothing gonna happen to you." He said as we heard another thud coming from our staircase. The footsteps were so heavy that there was dust coming down from my ceiling. Thud. "I don't know if you's gonna see me again, boy, but I want you to always remember what I taught you." Thud. "Why wouldn't I see you again, Dad? What's going to happen?" Thud. "We both can't escape. It wouldn't let us, boy." Thud. "Dad, I love you. I don't want you to leave." I sobbed back. Thud. My dad got up and opened the window. We were on the second floor. He picked me up. Thud. Kissed me on the cheek as a tear ran down his. He threw me out of the second-story window. I landed in some bushes below our house. I don't know if I was injured or not. I had too much adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Run, boy," he screamed as the thuds got faster. I took off running through the woods when I heard the most disturbing, blood-curdling scream I've ever heard in my entire life. I just kept running until I couldn't hear the screams anymore. That was many, many years ago. I kept running until I tired myself out, fell asleep under a tree. I returned to the house the following morning of the 26th. There was no sign of any struggle, no blood, nothing. My dad was just gone. I checked the cameras. The footage was gone. Looking through the recordings, it was just blank for the entire night. Now I'm a father, and I have my own kids. I have kept my dad's tradition alive every night before Christmas. I don't know if that thing was isolated to my neighborhood, or if that's what Santa is for everybody. All I know is, I'm not going to risk finding out. So with all that said, please, lock all of your doors on the night before Christmas. The next time you're awake during that night, and you hear noises in your house, I suggest you stay in bed and keep your eyes closed. Don't get up. Don't investigate. Don't be a curious little fucker like I was. The last thing I'll leave you with is, you better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. He knows when you're sleeping, and he knows when you're awake. But he doesn't care if you've been bad or good, so don't go looking for him, for your own sake. My wife and I decided to go on a romantic getaway last October. We love small touristy towns, and fall is our favorite time of the year. So we found a cute little bed and breakfast up in Maine and booked a room for the weekend. It was just what we needed. The place was nice enough. The elderly couple who owned the place were very friendly and spoke with thick New England accents. The room was big and rustic. All of the furniture was made out of wood, and there were deer antlers mounted on the wall. There was a wooden trunk at the end of the bed. It looked very old, and the carvings in the wood were quite ornate. There was also a padlock on it so you couldn't open it. We didn't think much of it. That night, we went out to dinner, walked around town for a bit, then came back to our room, made love, and fell asleep. But around 2 a.m., we were awoken by a scratching sound coming from inside the trunk. "What the hell is that?" my wife asked. I could tell she was freaked out. "I don't know," I said, turning on the lamp on my bedside table. More scratching. "Maybe a mouse got stuck in there and it's trying to get out." "That doesn't sound like a mouse," my wife said. She was right. It sounded much bigger. "Well, we should open it and let it out, whatever it is," I said, getting up. "How? It's locked." I checked the padlock, but unlike the trunk, it looked brand new. I put on my shoe and tried kicking the lock a few times, but that didn't work. As I looked around the room for something else, the scratching kept getting louder and more frantic. As a last resort, I pulled the deer antlers from off the wall over the bed. I jammed one of the pointy ends through the lock and put all of my weight on it. It would either snap the lock or the antlers. I didn't know which. Thankfully, it was the lock. I threw the broken padlock aside and knelt down in front of the trunk. My wife stood behind me, squeezing my shoulder in anticipation. The scratching continued, as if begging me to open the damn trunk already. "Be careful," my wife said. "Stand back," I warned. I stuck my fingers under the lid and opened the trunk. A blast of rancid air blew out, and I turned my head away and plugged my nose. My wife got the brunt of it, and she immediately started coughing and her eyes started watering. "Are you alright?" I asked. It took her about a minute to stop coughing. Her eyes were red and bloodshot. "I'm okay. Did you see what it was?" "No," I said. We both turned and looked in the trunk. It was empty. Maybe a mouse or small animal jumped out when we weren't looking. We searched the room but didn't find anything. We went back to the trunk. I checked the inside as well as the lid, but I didn't see any scratch marks. My wife and I stared at each other in disbelief. We didn't get much sleep that night. My wife kept getting up and running to the bathroom, coughing and puking her guts out. She said it was food poisoning. The next morning, we packed our bags and left the B&B. We were supposed to stay one more night, but my wife still wasn't feeling well. and we just wanted to get home. She was sick for 3 full days. I tried to get her to urgent care, but she told me she just wanted to rest. On the 4th day, she finally got out of bed and came downstairs for breakfast. She looked much better. I made her some eggs and toast, but she took one bite and pushed the plate away. Ever since then, she's been different. She hardly ever sleeps, she never eats, and she snaps at me all the time. She says she's fine, that she's never felt better, but I can tell something's wrong. Our cat Sebastian can tell too. He has always been my wife's cat. All I'm good for is putting food in his dish and cleaning his litter box. But he'll snuggle up to my wife on the couch while we're watching TV, or curl up next to her in bed on chilly winter nights. But now, Sebastian won't go near her, and he hisses if she tries to pet him. I think my wife is possessed. I think whatever was inside that trunk is now inside her. How do I know this? Last night, I woke up to a strange sound in our bedroom. It sounded just like the scratching that was coming from inside the trunk. I immediately sat up and looked down at the end of the bed to find my wife crouched there on the floor, staring at me and scratching the comforter with her nails. My home state of New Jersey is an interesting place. Rural New Jersey is riddled with poverty and abandoned properties. One of these places struck a specific chord with me. When I was a little kid, I went to this theme park with a, wooden theme. I think it was called Woody's Woodchuck Kingdom. Stupid, I know. Their mascot was Woody the Woodchuck, fairly obvious. I don't remember all of it, and I stopped going after the park fell into disrepair. Afterwards, it closed altogether. Despite me not having been in several years, it still stung. By that time I was in my early teens, and I hadn't been to a theme park like that in a long time. It wasn't cool, but I still missed the place, knowing that I couldn't go back, even though I didn't really want to. Throughout my late teens, I was a bit of a delinquent. I never got into drugs or anything, but whenever my friends and I had money, we would ditch school, get a bunch of candy from a convenience store, and then hang out in an abandoned building. We did a lot of urban exploring in high school, and almost never ran into any issues. The buildings were dilapidated, but never collapsing. It was creepy. But there were 4 of us, and we could handle ourselves in a fight. We went our separate ways after high school and drifted apart. I studied hard through college, and eventually my habit of fucking off with a million Snickers bars to explore an old hospital or something faded away. After graduating, I came back to and started searching for jobs. On my way to an interview, I drove past Woody's Kingdom and felt a twinge of nostalgia. Memories rushed back to me of my times there as a kid. It was so sad to see the place in the dilapidated state that it was. After my interview, I drove past it again and made up my mind. I was going to pick up 2 old habits at once. I was going to explore the kingdom. I didn't think it was pertinent to bring too much, but considering that I ended up posting here, that was obviously a mistake. I brought a flashlight, crowbar, water, some snacks, and a pocket knife. I wasn't hoping nor expecting to encounter anybody. I really only brought things that I would need to navigate the amusement park. I also wasn't usually the type to leave graffiti in the places that I explored, so I wasn't planning on bringing any paint or anything. I got into my Chevy Cruze and drove off to the amusement park. Woody's Woodchuck Kingdom was closed off from the public by a very basic chain link fence that was easy to scale. I had done this before, after all. I parked my Cruze in a hidden-ish spot, close to the entrance, and scaled the fence. There was no barbed or razor wire, which made my job quite easy. As I moved through the park, it was clear that few others had been in. There was little paint or garbage, but there was a curious amount of supplies left over. Tools, old and moldy boxes of food. There were even some ancient stuffed animals in the gift shops. Those items would seem quite easy to liquidate quickly, but they just lay about. Most of the rides were also completely intact, if under disrepair. It seemed like the place had been left in a rush. This was odd. Woody's Woodchuck Kingdom had been on the decline for almost a decade. It had been a rumor for almost as long as they were going to close down. It seemed like they had plenty of time to liquidate assets or dismantle rides. I wandered down the main street towards Woody's Castle, the centerpiece of the park and home of their mascot, King Woody. It was a large building with a cafe, gift shop, and a big main hall with a throne. Woody sat on it throughout the day, and kids came up to get signatures or get their pictures taken like they would any of the mascots at Disney World or something. I'm not entirely sure what I was expecting to find in there, but Woody staring straight back at me was not one of them. If I'm being honest, it scared the shit out of me. He wasn't supposed to be in here, and while he was normally cute and endearing, he looked downright scary. Water had managed to get inside, and he had begun to grow mold. Insects, like mosquitoes, buzzed about minding their insectoid business. He rested at an odd angle, but was clearly sitting in his throne. It was disturbing. I stared at him for a few straight seconds, and I could have sworn that he fidgeted. I shook off the feeling, and moved over to explore the cafe. It was just odd in there. In the main dining area, moth-eaten tablecloths rested on the tables with plates and utensils skewing about. I didn't need to explore the kitchen, because I could smell it. It was quite obvious that this place had been evacuated while it was still open. I didn't see any rats though. Maybe the smell was too bad for them as well. I moved over to the gift shop where, as could be seen in other ones, gifts remained in the shop. There were stuffed animals and yellowing postcards on the shelves. The cash register even had money in it, which I was quite tempted to take. But before I could, I heard crashing from the main hall. I ran over and I could swear Woody had moved. It almost looked like he wasn't sitting in the same position, almost like he moved. As I got closer to him, I saw that the chair next to him had been knocked over. It was upright when I came in. I was getting very scared now. As I got closer, I began to hear a sound, and it wasn't the insects. It was a rasping, cracking sound, almost like breathing, an old man breathing. I stood straight as a board, and as I did, I saw Woody do the same. I sprinted back out the front doors. I had never run so fast in my entire life. It couldn't have been more than 300 or 400 yards down the main street. I ran over to the main entrance and clawed my way up the fence at a breakneck pace. I felt some of my fingernails crack as I scrambled up the rusting chain-link fence. I fell to my knees on the way down, but quickly got up and got in my car. I had never felt so comfortable in my uncomfortable interior. As I looked out the passenger window, I saw an odd shape, one that I hadn't noticed on my way out. It was Woody. He had followed me. I quickly turned the key and floored it. The front wheel spun in the dirt, but eventually, I was off. As I drove past the outskirts of the gated-off area of the park, I began to regain my composure. I had pushed my car almost to its limits. The speedometer read almost 120. I slowed down before I got into an accident before I realized it better to just pull off the road entirely. I was breathing heavily. My pants were wet, and my knees were bloody. But I was fine. I am fine. Some of you may be disappointed to know this, but nothing happened to me. No paranormal assassin hunted me down and killed me. No unhinged psychopath in a woodchuck costume stalked me forever. I was fine. All that is left in this tale is a warning. Do not go urban exploring in New Jersey. It's strange how someone can have an impact on your life without being around. For me, that person is my grandfather. I never knew him, never even laid eyes on him, and yet his absence in my family cast so large a shadow. It was almost a presence in itself. We would see him in my mother's stiffened face whenever we asked about him. We would hear him during my grandmother's long silences, twisting her wedding ring in endless circles, staring into space. We would feel him in the walls of his great house, built from the fortunes of his antiques empire, his collection hidden away or shrouded from view. He did not feature any of the empty photo frames, and yet even as a child, I knew it was still his house. My grandmother just lived in it. His employees still worked, hustling and bustling with deliveries. Items bought and sold in his name still brought money to my family, but there was a hole inside that house, and within our lives. A silence that screamed of betrayal, abandonment, and unanswered questions. Ran off with some young lass. I overheard one of the movers say one day. He grunted as he lowered a chest of drawers, lacquered oak shimmering in the afternoon sun. My sister and I were playing hide and seek, so they had no idea I was eavesdropping. I stayed in my hiding place, peeking between ruffled dust sheets. There was a soft thunk as the legs settled on the polished wooden floor, and the man let out a sigh of relief. "That's what I reckon, ain't he, Road?" "Nah," said the other voice dismissively. "You do that? You take your money with you." My ears strained to wade through their accents. I knew exactly who they were talking about, and this sort of gossip was far more than I was ever likely to hear from any of my family. "So what do you think, then?" asked a more well-spoken voice. The new boy, most likely. I had something of a crush on him. "Something dodgy?" said the dismissive voice. Another grunt, another thud. "Where you want this one?" "Over by the grandfather clock, please." There was a pause and the new boy lowered his voice. "What do you mean dodgy?" "Come on, lad," heaved the dismissive mover through gritted teeth. They shuffled across the floor until I could barely see them, and plonked down in the cabinet. "You didn't get this kind of cheddar without doing something rotten." "Ted thinks he was murdered," said the first mover, resting a hairy arm on the cabinet as he caught his breath. In my hiding place, I held my breath and shifted, trying to get a better view. Despite the July heat, their conversation made the air feel so very cold. I shivered and hugged myself. "By who?" asked the new boy, then after a pause added, "Take this one and the cellaret over there." "Well, you were stealing from the Chinese, paying bribes to the Russians, on-cutting the Americans, and dodging taxes over here," said Ted, as the men moved back into view. "And that's just what we know about. Mark my words, lad. We'll open those crates one day and find what's left of him, stuffed inside. Just bones and teeth." I closed my eyes and kept my tears silent. Abrupt laughter burst from the two gruff men, and at first I feared they could see me, but when I peeked back at them, they were watching the new boy, struggling with a cargo crate. They effortlessly plucked it from his arms and set it down on the trolley. "Leave the lifting to us, lad," Ted said as they carted the stock out of the room. "You just tick them boxes." Their chuckles faded from the room, and even when they were gone, I didn't cry out loud, just clutched my knees and felt tears trickle down my cheeks. When Macy found me, several minutes later, I was still there, but I didn't feel like playing hide-and-seek anymore. "Why are you crying?" she asked quietly, tilting her head before shuffling over to sit next to me. She was 3 years younger than me, and was always such a tender soul. She leaned over and kissed my head softly, as though it would make me feel better, like our mother would when we fell over and scraped our knees. I didn't tell her, of course. I was far too protective for that. If I told her why I was crying, she would cry too. I wiped my tears away and flashed a smile. "Let's play something else." There were plenty of games to play when we visited our grandmother. In a house that size, with countless treasures and mysteries, even an adult could lose hours exploring and perusing. Two little girls could play forever. We could dance in the empty rooms, or listen to our echoes in the cavernous hallways. We could live a million lives amongst the vintage furniture, trying on dusty top hats, or having sword fights with silver-capped canes. We could drape ourselves in dust sheets, and pretend to be ghosts or birds or aeroplanes, running around with our flapping cloth cloaks trailing behind us. But new stock bought new guessing games. Hidden under the sheets that covered them were antiques freshly bought, ready to sell or ready to be restored to former glories. It would be years before I learned the intricacies behind the business, but as a child, it was close to magic. Most objects were easy. The sheets barely hid their outlines, but a blocky shape that looked like a table could end up being a stack of paintings, a freestanding chessboard, or a sealed crate with yet more mysteries lurking inside. We made our way through the fresh inventory, but I let my sister pull off the sheets and barely guessed, lost in thought. What if our grandfather was still in one of these boxes, desperate to get out, trapped in the dark? "Where are you going?" I heard Macy ask. My eyes focused, and I realized I was halfway out the door, staring down the corridor, towards the door with the ivory handle. Grandmother didn't have many rules for us to follow. Don't break anything, don't irritate the staff, but the one she always insisted on was don't go into the room with the ivory handle. She never explained why. She simply forbade it. Quick and clean. I'd always figured there were valuables in there she didn't trust to children. The door wasn't locked, and I'd seen the staff go in there a few times, but only the senior staff were allowed through this corridor. Senior staff and family. I glanced back at Macy and nodded for her to follow. She followed, and together we slowly made our way down the corridor. Empty photo frames hanging ominously above us. I always wished they'd just put something in them. Photos of my mother, or us, landscapes, art, anything really. Even taking them down would have been better than leaving them empty, like gilded tombstones. Approaching the door, it was impossible not to feel small. The black paneled door towered over us and had a way of looking heavy. Without having ever so much as touched it, somehow my mind knew the weight of it. With dry lips, I reached out to the handle. My fingers hovered, afraid it might burn to touch. Footsteps made me snatch my hand away, and I turned on my heels, babbling nervous gibberish to my sister. Lucille, my least favorite administrator, stalked past. Her heels click-clacking. She ignored us completely as she passed. I don't think she cared for children. Or, not for us at least. I always thought she looked shriveled up, like a piece of fruit left out in the sun. "Are we going to get in trouble?" whispered Macy, after Lucille had left our view. "No," I said with a smile. "Of course not." But I knew it was too risky to try whilst the staff were still here. In a couple of hours, they would finish, and it would just be us and our grandmother. So I raced Macy to the gardens, and we practiced cartwheels. But even in the summer sun, I couldn't get the image of my grandfather out of my mind, pressed in tight, clawing at the wooden insides of his box-shaped grave, pleading for us to find him. The staff left at 5 o'clock, and we had dinner with our grandmother. Afterwards, we usually sat and did puzzles or drew pictures, but because the sun was still shining, our grandmother said we could keep playing outside if we wanted to. We did, but only until she took her eyes off us. Then we took off inside, sneaking towards the door with the ivory handle. The house was a different place with the staff gone, even in full daylight. It somehow felt larger and more foreboding. Macy's fingers found my hand and held it as we walked. The ivory handle glistened, as if inviting us. Looking closely, I saw it had golden leaves snaking around the outside and curling along its edges. Macy squeezed my hand tight as I reached out and opened it, letting the door swing slowly open with a drawn-out creak of rusty hinges. There were no windows, and though I tried the light switch, the only light that trickled in was the creeping remnants of daylight, bouncing off the corridor behind us. It made the shadowy shapes within the room look dark indeed, like a nightmare version of the guessing game we played. Macy stood at the door as I crept inside. She squeaked, and I turned to see her pointing to my left. A hulking figure draped in a white sheet loomed over us, and peeking out from between the sheets was shaggy brown hair and giant, curled claws. Heart leaping, I braced for the monster to attack, but nothing happened. After a moment, I plucked up more courage than I knew I had, and slowly tugged at the dust sheet covering the monster. It fell away, and as I saw teeth and fur, my blood ran cold, if only for a moment. It was a bear, stuffed and unmoving. Behind me, Macy giggled. She must have been emboldened by my display of temporary bravery, as she stepped to my side and joined me in unveiling the shapes within the dim room. Dust leapt into the air, swirling and making us splutter. One by one, the extravagant shapes were revealed. Patterned vases, golden toy soldiers, intricate galleons somehow placed within glass bottles. I could see why we weren't allowed in this room. Everything was fragile or delicate, and seemed like a toy to the eyes of young children. The thrill we got from unveiling each bizarre object even overpowered the melancholy mood that had hung over me like a black cloud, and I joined Macy in smiling and giggling. We began to guess what the next shape was, before our eyes strained through to make it out amongst the fading light. One in particular caught my eye. "It's a statue," I said. "A statue of a person." "It's too little for a person," said Macy. "They're sitting down. Look." I pointed at what I thought was the head, nose, ears, mouth. My finger traced the air, curving around the folds of fabric draped over whatever was hidden underneath. The way it hung made me convinced. A statue or a shop mannequin. A large doll maybe. The head and shoulders were a giveaway. Macy was right though. It was too short, but the way the dust sheets also covered a blocky oblong beneath the person made me think of a park bench I'd once seen, with a statue occupying one seat and the other empty. I stretched out my hand, and just as my fingers settled on the fabric, whatever was underneath shifted. I flinched back, snatching my hand away and stumbling, my foot getting caught in the trailing sheet. I snagged it, and some of the dust sheet slid away, the rest getting tangled around the object underneath. Half revealed, barely lit by what little daylight trickled through the open doorway, was a sofa. My mind barely registered it, my eyes locked on what I thought had been a statue. Most of it was still wrapped in tangled sheets, but enough had been removed to show a trouser leg and polished black leather shoes. Macy stepped forwards to pull off the rest of the sheet, thinking it was another toy, like the bear, but I shot out a hand to stop her. It had moved. If it was a statue, it looked very, very real, and it had definitely moved. "Don't," I whispered to Macy, but the moment the words left my mouth, they died. The folds of sheets twisted, the head of whatever was beneath snapping suddenly to face me. Macy froze like a startled deer. We both watched the figure on the sofa, and it watched right back. Now I was looking closely. I could see it breathing, the sheets around its shoulders slowly rising and falling. Not daring to blink, not daring to speak, I gripped hold of Macy's dress, forcing her backwards with me as I stepped slowly and carefully out of the room, never taking my eyes off the figure. It was so horribly, painfully clear to me now. It was a person. There was somebody hiding in my grandmother's house. Their head followed us, glacier slow, and I desperately swallowed the instinct to sink down into a ball and cry. The dust sheet rippled, and a section near the waist folded as whoever was underneath grabbed hold. They began to rise to their feet, dust sheets enveloping them like a specter. I didn't stop to watch. With strength I didn't know I had, I physically lifted Macy off the ground and ran, both of us screaming and crying so hard I could barely see where I was running. I didn't close the door or turn back to look. I didn't stop running until I found my grandmother. Didn't stop screaming and shouting until my mother, my father, and some of the staff showed up. Didn't stop crying until I fell asleep. They didn't find anybody, of course. They searched the house. Nothing. No signs except disturbed dust sheets, all of which were blamed on me and my sister. Our mother and father had ended their night early to collect us, and whilst they were glad we were unharmed, we got the biggest telling off of our lives for going into the room with the ivory handle. It was a long time until we were allowed to play unsupervised at my grandmother's house. When we went back, we were told the door with the ivory handle was going to be locked from now on. They said it as though they were trying to reassure us, but I heard the truth loud and clear. They didn't believe us. Macy was happy though. She said she never wanted to go in that room ever again, and refused to even look at it, sometimes going around the house rather than walking past it. I wasn't satisfied though, and as the terror of the events slowly faded away, I began to consider another possibility. What if that person wasn't a stranger, hiding amongst the old relics? What if it was my grandfather, still alive, still visiting us and our grandmother? That would explain why the house always felt like his. He was still living inside it. I tried explaining this to Macy, but it just made her upset. She was still scared of that room, so I knew if I was going to go back, it would have to be alone. The staff might have locked the door, but they didn't lock the room where they kept the key, and it didn't take too much searching to find it. The next time my parents went away and left us with our grandmother, I was ready to explore again, to find my grandfather and meet him properly. He hadn't tried to hurt us after all. He just stood up, and we'd gotten scared and ran away. I stole the key and hid it beneath my pillow. When night came, I waited until Macy fell asleep, sneaking out of my room into the hall. My grandmother was watching television, facing away from the hall, and it was easy to creep past her and down the main stairwell of the house. I was walking barefoot, and the floor was icy cold on the bottom of my feet, tiptoeing past boxes of new stock and inventory. I made my way down the corridor, eyes locked on the black door and the white ivory handle, shining like a beacon on the faint echoes of moonlight. I'd taken a torch, but I didn't need it. As the door creaked open, An instinctive flick of the light switch revealed the staff had changed the broken light bulbs before locking the door. The sudden, artificial light was almost blinding. The shrouded shapes were identical to my previous visit, though they weren't nearly as ominous without the shadows to ensnare them. It was reassuring, and the light made all my nerves vanish. More than ever, I was convinced. Tonight, I was going to meet my grandfather. As I stalked between the sheet-covered shapes, somewhat familiar and recognizable from before, I noticed only one difference. The blocky shape of the sofa was vacant. Searching the last hidden spaces of the room, it quickly became obvious. My grandfather wasn't here. The room was empty. Apart from the hidden treasures, a crushing weight settled over my shoulders, and I shook my head slightly, trying to ward off stinging tears. I was just a silly little girl, up past her bedtime chasing ghosts. I walked towards the sofa, wanting to sink down and go to sleep right there, but a hissing voice stopped me before I took my final steps. "What are you doing?" Macy, at the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I didn't see any point in lying. "I'm looking for Granddad, but he's not here. Nobody's here." As if to check, Macy's eyes drifted off to the vacant sofa. I expected her to nod and turn to leave, but instead, her eyes went wide and her lips began to tremble. She pointed, and I turned to look. An insect, or something, was crawling beneath the dust sheets, right across the sofa cushions. It was the size of a small animal, like a rabbit, but the way the sheet moved was too spindly and angular. The sheet shifted and twisted around the shape of whatever was underneath. It could almost have been a spider, but each leg joint that poked under the sheet was as thick as my knuckle. If I'd have dared to move, I would have smashed it with my torch and kept hitting it until the dust sheet stopped moving. Frozen as I was, all I could do was watch. I crept forwards on the sofa. As it went over the edge, it didn't fall. The sheets rippled, and it continued walking downwards at the same steady pace. Whatever it was, I'd soon find out. It was walking straight towards me, and was about to emerge from beneath the sheets. The sheets waved gently, as though stirred by a breeze, and something drifted out, elegant and smooth. Fingers. Clean, perfectly manicured fingers. A youthful woman's hand peeked out, each finger painted with red fingernail polish. The hand was so leisurely in its movements, floating above the ground, arm disappearing back beneath the sheets. Yet there was no shape beyond the tawdry, draped fabric. There was nobody on the sofa, no way somebody could contort themselves to fit what little void existed between cloth and cushion. Mouth unable to close as the hand slowly rotated and took hold of the sheet, raising higher and higher to reveal the floral patterned sofa and pinewood legs, as though it were a woman hitching up her skirts. The colors of the sofa were so vivid and vibrant, it was hard to believe we hadn't noticed it before. Even with a person distracting us, even in the near darkness, the flowers looked so real. You could almost see the morning dew forming on the petals, almost feel the sun's reflection glittering in the tilt of wind-brushed leaves. Before it rose above the cushioned seats, the hand released the dust sheet and beckoned me. It withdrew, slowly disappearing beneath the sheets, and the shape of the arm slithered away. The way it curved and twisted made me shiver. Even as young as I was, I knew no human arm could bend that way. Whatever was underneath that thin layer of fabric, it moved the way a snake did, writhing and uncoiling. The sofa was dazzling. It appeared pure white behind the flowers, but it couldn't have been. It was too bright. White somehow seemed too dull a color to describe it. It was almost blinding to look at, yet I couldn't stop myself. Macy was at my side, and we both stared unblinking at the fabric and flowers, and the new colors our eyes had never seen before. Birds fluttered into the room with silent flapping wings. Hummingbirds, dozens of them, hovering and sipping from the flowers of the fabric. It took me a long moment to realize they weren't in the room at all. They were just another pattern, stitched into the fabric of the cushion. And yet they were moving. One by one, they zipped beneath the covering, following the hand, and for a moment, I wanted to follow them. I took a step forward and stopped myself. Macy had made the same step forwards at the exact same time. We turned to look at each other, peeling our eyes away from the sofa. That was enough. Something deep and primal told me I shouldn't sit down, yet somehow it was easier to stop each other than stop ourselves. We didn't speak, but together, my sister and I left the room, gripping hold of each other and never breaking eye contact. When we reached the door, I flicked off the light and shut the creaking door with all my strength. As the room with the ivory handle vanished from view, I saw for one brief moment a man. He was barely visible in the darkness, but he sat on the sofa, hands on his knees. His cold eyes met mine, and even the half second before the door closed was too long. The moment the door was shut, I locked it. We never went into that room again. Neither me or Macy have ever spoken about it, to each other or anyone else. She might not even remember. Perhaps I would have been able to dismiss it as childish fantasy, if it wasn't for the thing I saw yesterday. My grandmother passed away last year. Her ashes were kept in an urn, but during the house sale and all the moving, somehow the ashes got lost. They found the urn, which never left the house, but the ashes were gone. Obviously, my family was devastated. A few people who probably didn't deserve it got fired, but we never found out who was responsible or what happened. During the final weeks of the house sale, all of our grandfather's vast fortune and old treasures got divided amongst family, friends, and loyal employees. Of particular interest to most were several items locked behind a door with an ivory handle. Macy and myself avoided that particular day of exploration. But as I said my last goodbyes to the house, I couldn't help but notice a familiar shape amongst the others, draped beneath dust sheets, the blocky outline of a sofa, with something placed on it, something with a head and shoulders, the vague outline of a person, perched on the sofa with room to spare. At the very bottom, peeking beneath the sheets, was the trim of a faded green dress and matching green buckled shoes. My grandmother's shoes. Whatever was wearing them shifted slightly beneath the dust sheet, turning to face me, and patted the empty seat. "12 years, 3 months, and 5 days ago, my daughter entered the world. Her birth was very peculiar. She didn't scream at first. She simply observed the room with her big, blue eyes, watching the doctor that delivered her, the nurses, me, and at last, my wife, her mother. Once she laid eyes on my wife, the screaming came. The low wails at first, and then she erupted in the stereotypical baby scream as awaited. The doctor thought nothing of it. He thought it odd, but told me not to worry when I pressed him about it. I'd never been in a delivery room before, but from what I had heard and seen on TV, a baby is supposed to scream when they get delivered. But if the doctor said it's fine, then I guess it's fine. He is a doctor after all. My wife came down with postnatal depression and sat in her room most of the days. She did feed her and change her diaper, but for the first months of her life, her mother didn't show her much of the motherly love that most mothers do. But it was understandable. She had a rough pregnancy with really bad morning sickness and nightmares almost every night. Sadly, my job as an operator in a mine didn't help. I was gone most of the days, and the days I did take off were treasures. I tried to make her comfortable by giving her back rubs and foot massages, but nothing seemed to ease her discomfort. She told me one night after we came home from the hospital that she felt too young to be a mother, which is understandable. We were both in our early 20s when Beth was born, but my wife's depression eventually eased and she became the loving mother that Beth needed, while I was at work pulling long shifts to support them both. As Beth grew older, we noticed some slightly strange behavior. She wouldn't play with any of the other children when we went to the park. She once saw a kid get seriously injured in the jungle gym, and she showed absolutely nothing. No emotion, no sympathy, nothing. Eventually, before she started first grade, we took her to get an evaluation. They ran several tests, but they showed nothing. No anomalies, nothing. Due to her behavior though, they diagnosed her with being on the spectrum and sent us home. I felt that they should have ran a few more tests, but then again, they are the ones with the PhDs and the degrees. and I'm just a guy that runs a digger and a strip mine. But it just got weirder and weirder, especially towards my wife, her mother. It started with low-grade insults. She called my wife a dumb face at first, then a bad mother, bad wife, idiot, R-word, N-word, and eventually a whore. Strong words from a now 9-year-old. They would lash out at each other almost every day, and Beth would scream at the top of her lungs how much she hated her mother, and my wife would run up to our bedroom sobbing. I remember the night before my wife died. She and Beth had been in a huge fight. Both ran to their rooms in tears. My wife cried from being degraded by her own daughter. Beth cried from her hatred of her mother. I slowly walked upstairs to console my wife. I used to run upstairs, but I was so used to it at this point, and I knew that trying to sort things out was pointless. Beth wouldn't budge about her mother. She hated her, and I'm not even sure that she herself knows why. It's just the way she is. If she decides to dislike someone, then she won't ever like that person. But it was different with her mother. She really hated her, and she would do everything to make her mother's life as miserable as possible. But that night, as I walked upstairs, I passed Beth's room. I peeked in to see what state she was in, and she just sat there. Her face was completely void of emotion, her big, now green eyes looking into her bedside drawer, while her hand was digging through it. She pulled up a candle. That was odd, I thought. Was she really old enough to play with candles? I mean, she was just 10 at the time, and she did have a slightly violent streak, although mainly verbal, but still. The candle was beautiful though, long and purple with some pink writing wrapping around it. She put it in a holder and struck a match, lighting the candle and then shaking it out. She proceeded to just stare at the candle, watching the flame with her big, absolutely gorgeous green eyes. Maybe that soothed her, I thought. In that case, I'm absolutely fine with her having candles. She needed something to soothe her mind. My wife was still a wreck when I reached her room. I didn't bring up the candle issue as I just assumed that my wife bought them for her after one of her support group meetings. My wife was sobbing, looking at Beth's baby pictures to cheer her up. I gave her a back rub and started her favorite TV show on the TV while tucking her in. It was late and making her go to sleep was the best option, as she was otherwise gonna stay up all night crying. I talked to her for a bit and ran my fingers through her hair, as I knew that calmed her down as well. Before one episode of her show, she was sound asleep. I got up to make myself a couple of sandwiches for my lunchbox, and to make some sweet tea for Beth. When I walked by her door, she was still sitting in her bed, watching the candle. Now she was smiling. The candle worked, I thought, and told her to change to her PJs and get into bed. She answered in the affirmative but kept watching the candle intensely. I went downstairs, made my sandwiches, made the tea, and brought a cup up to Beth. When I entered the room, the candle had burned out, and Beth was in bed, in her PJs, and with a gentle smile on her face. Thank God she got her mother's looks, I thought as I gave her the tea. I talked to her and told her that she had to start being nicer to her mother as she only had one. She obliged, and I gave her a goodnight kiss on her forehead and tucked her in bed before face-planting my pillow. I woke up the next day around 4 a.m. I got up, sighed as I remembered that I had the morning shift, and thanked modern technology for keeping track of my shifts for me. I didn't wake up my wife as it had simply been too mean, but I gave her a kiss on the cheek. Her cheek felt cold. Odd, I thought, as it was summer, and we live in the South. I felt her pulse. Nothing. Now I tried to wake her, but still, nothing. I was freaking out, but thinking of my daughter's diagnosis and how important her day schedule was, I didn't scream or anything. I felt helpless. My wife was no longer with me. My daughter was sound asleep, and to top it all off, my phone was dead. I had to use my wife's phone. Walk out of the house and called emergency services. The wait was excruciating. I tried to administer CPR, but still nothing. Not even a flinch or an exhale or anything. Dead silence. The ambulance came and she was pronounced dead on the spot. My heart was shattered. Not to pieces, more grounded to a fine powder, and then strewn about like fertilizer for very dead flowers. I didn't know what to do. How was I going to explain this to Beth? How would she react? I called work. They understood and had somebody else run my machine while I grieved. I told Beth in the morning, and to my surprise, she took it well. In fact, wasn't affected at all. She just said, "Okay, Dad," and she went off to the school bus. I had already called the school and told them that her mother had died and that she was to stay home that day, but was so shocked by her just shrugging her mother's death off as a new piece of information that I couldn't say anything. I had to call the school again and tell them that she was still coming and maybe she could see a counselor. I spent the day mourning, calling a funeral director, calling relatives and acquaintances, and mourning some more. My daughter's reaction didn't help. Did she really care that little about her mother? Did her death really not affect her even in the slightest? She seemed almost giddy at hearing the bad news. I drank a beer, walked the dog, cried some more, and took a nap. When I woke up, Beth was home. I wanted to talk to her, but I didn't. I was too depressed. I never brought it up. I just couldn't bring myself to discuss the matter with her, so I didn't. For over 2 years, I never mentioned her mother to Beth. I guess I was too afraid of what she would answer if I asked her. Last Christmas, it happened again. My daughter got into a fight with her teacher. She came home, very upset. She ran upstairs, went into her room and took out another candle. I heard her strike the match, and when I walked upstairs, she sat there, once again, just staring into the flame. This confirmed it to me that they were to soothe her. I never got to ask her mother where the candles came from, since she died. After the candle had burnt out, again I tucked her in and kissed her goodnight. The day after, I got a call from her school informing me that her teacher had passed away during the night. I asked what happened, and the school administrator told me that she passed away of unknown causes during the night. That's odd, just like her mother, I thought. Everything felt so similar. The fight, the candles, the cause of death. It all felt the same. Odd, weird, strange. Gave me the jitters. After that deja vu, I made food for me and Beth. We ate, talked, packed my lunchbox for the night shift, and I went off to work. As I sat in my excavator, I couldn't help but to think about how she seemed so happy. She even helped me pack my lunchbox and gave me a kiss goodbye. She never did that before. I got a bit distracted and accidentally ran my bucket into the dump truck, seriously startling the dump truck driver. I radioed my apologies, and I decided to focus up and not overthink the stuff about Beth. A couple of weeks go by and Beth gets into another fight. She gets home, lights a candle, goes to sleep. Next week, another fight, another candle, another death. Is it the candles? No, that's silly. Candles can't kill people. Also, why would my 12-year-old daughter kill people? She's not sinister. She's just a bit odd, a bit quirky. Sure, she could lash out sometimes, but are there any kids that don't? I let it go and kept on with my business. This all brings us to last night. Beth came home in a real bad mood. I asked her what's wrong, and she called me a dumb fuck for asking. I told her to watch her language, and she lashed out at me, calling me names and just overall acting like an entitled brat. I told her to go to her room. She obliged. After a while, she calmed down, came down, and seemed really sorry for what she said. She even made me food. The food was delicious, but tasted a little strange, but that's what I expect from a kid who's never cooked before. After dinner, she told me that she's going to sleep, and that I should sleep too because I have the morning shift. This time, she brought me upstairs, tucked me in, and gave me a goodnight kiss. "Good night, Dad," she said as she left my bedroom. She didn't close the door all the way, so I turned around and looked out in the hallway. I could see her doorway. That's when I heard it, a quick, rasping sound. A match? Light emitted from her door, a warm light, like the light from a candle. The hairs on my body stood up. Shivers went down my spine. Was I right the first time? Does my daughter kill people by using her candles? Is she killing me? Her own father? I collected myself. Was there something special about the candles? I got up from bed, slowly, sneaked out from my room, tiptoed over to her doorway and tried to peek in. She sat there, staring with her big, green eyes into the flame. She didn't notice me. She was almost hypnotized by the candle. I saw something glisten under her eye. A tear? I looked closely at the candle. I tried to read the writing. It was numbers, lines, and a few letters. Minutes, 1 to 60. So it's a time candle. But wait, time is backwards. It starts with 60 and goes down to 1. There is also a flask by her bedside table. It has the same color scheme as the candle. It's opened. Is it a fragrance? As the candle burned down towards 15, I started to feel nauseated. My head was spinning and it became harder and harder to focus on the candle. As about half of the candle had burned, I passed out from the nausea. While laying there, on the carpet, as I felt my mind slowly drifting away, I heard her talk. My sweet little daughter stood there in the doorway and told me, "The man who raised her. Why did you do it, Dad? Why were you mean to me?" I woke up the next day, dizzy. What happened last night? I asked myself as I tried to sit up. Did my own daughter, my sweet Beth, try to kill me? I fell back down into my pillows and stayed there. I heard footsteps. My door opened. "Hey, Dad." It was Beth, with a breakfast tray. She walked over to me, put the tray down by my legs, and hopped up next to me. She looked cheerful. Big smile across her face and sparkles in her big green eyes. "I made you breakfast since I woke up before you for once," she giggled. I ate the breakfast, drank the coffee, and finally had enough energy to sit up. Beth still sat there, looking at me, sparkles in her eyes and that big, warm but at the same time slightly sinister smile. "What's up with you, kiddo?" I asked Beth. "You seem extra happy today." "You're so silly, Dad," she said, bigger smile now. "Can I skip school today?" "No, you can't, young lady," I told her sternly. That was a silly question if I ever heard any. She knew that as long as she wasn't sick, she had to go to school. "Why are you so mean to me, Daddy?" Her smile was gone. It was replaced by a look I'd only seen once, when she lashed out at her mother. "Don't you remember what happens when someone is mean to me?" My heart froze. Fear crept up my spine and I couldn't speak. So it wasn't a dream. It was real. She stared at me. Her eyes seemed much less cheerful now. They seemed almost hateful. She stared at me for about a minute and then she smiled. The same big wide smile as before, and she jumped off the bed and skipped away, taking the tray with her while chanting, "No school, no school." I just sat there as the new reality of my life started to set in. Right then I knew. This is what would fill every day of my life from now on. Fear, dreadful, carnal, spine-chilling fear.